Welcome back to another episode of the Talking Balls podcast. Today, I'm joined by commentary legend Clive Tyldesley. Clive, how are you?
As good as can be. Yeah, better than probably most. I've realised that I'm very lucky still to be going to football, still to be working, let alone working in my dream job. So it's different, and at times it's a little bit more difficult. But I'm very appreciative of the fact that my circumstances are an awful lot better than most people's at the moment.
Of course, I think no one foresaw the circumstances we find ourselves in, especially the circumstances you find yourself in terms of going to an empty stadium without fans. I don't think that's something that anyone would have envisaged. But what was it that initially drew you towards a career in commentary?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure that I've got an answer because it was about 400 years ago. It was just what I always wanted to do, and my parents would tell you the same. That from my early teens, certainly, maybe even before. Perhaps a reflection on my sporting prowess, that my sporting ambitions were always more towards broadcasting rather than, winning the US Masters or lifting the Champions League, European Cup. So I guess a lot of my early, I don't like the word hero really, or idol, because it's not that kind of relationship, but the people that I had felt an affinity with and could almost identify with my sort of hopes and aspirations were broadcasters, the great commentators of my youth, and I'm still in awe of them. Many of them are sadly not with us anymore. My main mentor in my career, Reg Gutteridge, who was a boxing commentator, not with us anymore. The man that I succeeded at ITV, who was very, very kind to me, Brian Moore, not with us anymore. Probably my favourite sports commentator of all, a guy called Pat Summerall, who was an NFL commentator in the States, not with us anymore. But their voices are, and you can. If I'm trying to explain to a media undergraduate or to a young wannabe broadcaster what I consider to be good broadcasting, I can always direct them towards tapes of these guys in action, and so their legacy is what I guess fired my ambitions and inspires me to this day. And I do sometimes still, via my favorite search engine, find a bit of Summerall just to remind me how good he was and why.
And when did you start to realise that you had a talent as a commentator? Because I suppose it's not like football in the sense that when you're younger you get better through experience. As in commentating, to get into that as a career from such a young age is not something that you do directly with first-hand experience naturally.
Well, there are a few things that you said there which kind of are worthy of a bit of analysis. Talent, is it a talent? Maybe. Am I any good? That's a matter of opinion. Fortunately, the very fact that I'm in a job and still in a job suggests that there are more people that think I can do it than think that I'm totally hopeless. I hope that you do improve with experience, although again, the question of whether you've improved or not is a matter of opinion. Certainly from my own point of view, I feel that I have developed as a commentator during the course of my career, and I think the most rewarding or most helpful element of that is listening to other commentators, listening to your own work back, and analysing it, hopefully learning specifics, detail that you can improve on, and also getting an overview of what broadcasting and communication is about. And it is part of a wider field. I mean, football commentary is what it is. It's not important in a sense that we don't save anybody's life, but it is, it is part of a greater sphere, which is journalism, which is information provision, which is guidance. So you should take the risk, even though you, in a sense, a football match isn't that important. You should take the responsibilities of communication seriously, and I try to do that, and that's how I try to improve, by listening and learning all the time.
As someone that's very passionate about the next generation of broadcast journalism, what do you feel are the key attributes that a commentator must possess?
I think that a commentator is first and foremost a communicator, a journalist, and even though somebody who is commenting on the political scene at the moment, certainly somebody who is commenting on a situation in Hong Kong or Nigeria or somewhere where there is conflict and danger to life, their jobs carry far more of a weight of responsibility, far more significance than anything that a sports commentator does. But I do believe that the principles are essentially the same, that we are given an assignment, in this case, a football commentary, that we do as much research as we can to know more about the background and the context of that match, that occasion, that conflict as we can, so that we're informed, hopefully sufficiently informed to weigh opposing views and find an editorial balance that we can present then to the listeners and viewers. And then we have to learn the actual art of communication, the delivery, how best to use this wonderful language that we have at our disposal, how best to relate to a diverse audience, diverse in so many ways, not just gender and age, but in background and knowledge, what they know about football, as opposed to somebody who's catching maybe one of 5 or 6 games that they see in the course of a year. And you've got to try to be inclusive and speak to all of those people, make them understand. And again, that's really, really important at the moment if you're a political analyst, because we do assume far too much knowledge about things like Brexit, the whole coronavirus is full of unknowns to the leading scientists in the world. It's full of unknowns. So when you're dealing with all of that, there is a responsibility on you as a communicator, which goes beyond just getting a click or making a headline or, finding some flowery words or, again, it's different if you're working in radio TV, because TV is led by the pictures, by the visuals. So again, your role is defined by how you're communicating, what platform. Media is changing by the day. The consumption of media, the provision of media is changing by the day. So as a commentator, even though what you are doing for a couple of hours is not going to save anybody's life or change anybody's life, markedly, it might make them miserable or happy for a little while. I think that the responsibilities are as serious as they are for any journalist, and therefore, as I say, the preparation, the consideration, the delivery, and the reflection, listening to it back, seeing how you could have been better. They're all, if this is what you do for a living, and it is what I do for a living, then and it's what you want to do for a living, what you're aspiring to do when you graduate, you've got to take it seriously. I mean, you've not got to walk around with a terribly stern face and full of your own importance all the time. You know, you've got to find your context, your perspective. You've got to have some perspective as to how important what you're doing really is, and deliver it accordingly. But it's got to be important to you. You know, this is not just any kind of career course that you're looking to follow. This has got to come from your heart. It's something, presumably, it's kind of vocational, something you really, really want to do. So if you've got the opportunity, and you have got the opportunity, you've got this far, you owe it to yourself and to the great power of communication to be as serious about it as you possibly can. And as I say, it all sounds a little bit grim and it may be full of its own importance, me talking about a football commentary in these ways, but it's to me. And you know, if I feel as if I've done a poor job, everybody around me knows about it.
When as a commentator, when you're watching a game, when a young player breaks through and scores the winner, for the best example that comes to mind is, of course, your famous line, of course, Wayne Rooney's goal against Everton, for Everton against Arsenal, I should say. How difficult is it to differentiate from that player being the story of that particular match and then being lauded as the next big thing in the media?
Well, Wayne Rooney's goal was a little while ago, and I think if it had been scored this weekend, it would be treated a little differently than it was then. I mean, it was big news then, and he was a shooting star, and he was all over the newspapers and all over TV, and anybody who'd ever met him was being interviewed to try to find his background. But the scrutiny on anybody in the spotlight today is different to what it was at the start of Wayne's career. And again, you know, you with the privilege really of being the voice associated with that moment, I've got to try to find its context. And you know, the context of that game, of that moment, was a record-breaking goal. At the time, the youngest Premier League scorer. And obviously you had that information at hand just in case. He was only a substitute on the day, but just in case he comes on and scores. Just yesterday, I commentated on a game which Jermaine Defoe scored his 300th club goal. And, you know, I've had that information. I've been waiting for, he's been waiting on 299 for a couple of months. So that information's been there. And obviously he might have scored it like on Thursday in Belgium when I wasn't commentating. So all of that research is sort of, but as it happened, you know, I had the information, I had the background of when he scored his first goal, to put it in some context, over 20 years ago, who he was playing with when he scored his first goal, and so on and so forth. So you're giving that some context, you're giving the record some context. It's not just a stat as such. But when Wayne scored that goal, what's interesting about it were two things kind of overrode the record. You know, I had the facts and figures ready in case he scored, but at that moment I had to make a judgment. What's the most important thing to shout out? Oh, there's the youngest Premier League goal scorer. No, the most important thing was that it was a goal of beauty. It was just a wonderful, wonderful goal, and to be scored by somebody who you know, wasn't even old enough to take a driving lesson at the time. You're trying to find some context. I guess you're speaking to every other 16-year-old that's watching, or every parent of a 16-year-old, and just trying to, you know, this guy's 16, you know, and look what he's just done. So it's a wonderful, wonderful goal, and I don't know what I said, but it was something to that effect. And then, of course, the most important thing about it was that it was in the 89th minute. It had put Everton in front. It was probably the winning goal, and Arsenal hadn't lost for the best part of a year, and it was past the England goalkeeper. So the very fact, this stat which I had up my sleeve and on my notes, was kind of getting pushed down the running order all the time, because I'm editorializing on the spot, and my mind is telling me, and I think I got it right at the time, that the most important thing here is the wonder of the goal. The second most important thing is that it's probably a winning goal against a team that doesn't lose. And then the third thing, almost as an aside, oh, by the way, he's also the youngest Premier League goal scorer. So, you know, that kind of editorializing is important. And I think that's kind of what I think our job is. And so I do think a goal of wonder deserves something better than, oh, incredible, unbelievable, fantastic. I think you do, particularly if you're on television and you have the luxury of being able to let the pictures tell a little bit of the story and give yourself some thinking time. I think you have to come up with some. There's an audacity about this goal, that there's a cheek about it. A 16-year-old trying to take it over the goalkeeper, the England goalkeeper. So you've got to try and find the words that reflect that better than just incredible, unbelievable. Then you've got to find something which captures, the wonder of this virtual unknown. And I came up with the line at the time, and remember the name, Wayne Rooney. Thank goodness he wasn't a dud, that he actually went on to have a career. Otherwise, it would have been a pretty rubbish line if that was the only goal he ever scored. And then, as I say, finally, because you've got that time, and nobody's going to come and take the microphone off you at any stage, you can wait to deliver the information that he is. By the way, as a statistical aside, you've just seen the youngest man ever to score in the Premier League score a goal. So yeah, it's a real process.
In recent years, there's a common consensus that football's leaning slightly more towards the armchair fan than the average match day game fan, obviously before the pandemic. How big an impact do you feel the media have had on modern football?
It's difficult to assess the impact that we that work in the media have on the way the game is played and watched, particularly at this time. But I think it's important that we continually analyze that, because we do have a responsibility, particularly at the moment, as kind of the only people. I sometimes when I'm talking to undergraduates, I talk about Phidippides as being the first journalist. Phidippides was the guy that ran back from the Battle of Marathon to Athens to tell the people of Athens who had won. And in a sense, that's what we do. We get this special pass to be able to go into a stadium that nobody else can go into at the moment, and come out and tell everybody who are locked out of that stadium what happened, who won. It's obviously a little bit more complex and scientific than that in the 21st century than it was back in Phidippides' time. But that's kind of what we're challenged to do. The clue is in commentary. We're commenting. We're obviously part of, as a radio commentator, you're having to describe essentially to a blind audience what is happening, rather in that basic way that Phidippides did, who just scored. But in television, you're hoping to add and amplify to what people can already see. Now, it's interesting, sort of fast forward into the 21st century, and the analysis and scrutiny now, not only of football, but of the coverage of football, that we arrive at a situation where, for instance, in the last couple of months, there's been a report on racial stereotyping in commentary, and I've been aware of this as an ongoing narrative for some years, and I think hopefully I've been mindful of the dangers of falling into sort of lazy stereotypes about all kinds of people. I mean, and not just the color of the skin. We have this thing about redheads being hotheads and stuff. I mean, that sounds trivial compared to the racial thing, and it is, but it's an indication of how easily we sort of categorize people, and football has a way of almost rather like a library, placing people on a certain shelf. You know, it's strange when you hear people, managers and coaches assessing footballers. They'll say he or she is really, really quick, really, really strong, but, and then so that they almost have a tick list, and it's like a pros and cons as to whether this is a player that you would try to sign or try to select. But we do allocate qualities to certain people in order to try to build up almost a photographic picture of them. And as the people watching on and commenting and communicating what we're seeing to a wider audience, we have to keep asking ourselves whether we're just kind of following a lead of a perception about somebody or a game or the way a team plays, you know, the way Roy Hodgson sets a team up, the way Steve Bruce sets a team up, or whether in actual fact, if we look a little bit more closely, which we should be doing all the time, and analysing and editorialising, the truth's not quite that simple. That there might be more variety, more depth to a particular individual's qualities, or to a particular manager's approach to the game. So I think it is. I think that we can influence people's thinking. And I think we have to take that responsibility on board, probably more so the likes of Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher and Ian Wright and so on, the guys who played the game, and you know, Alex Scott and stuff, and have sort of been down there on the battleground and can come back and tell the rest of us what it's like. You know, they probably have a greater influence on how people think about footballers and football teams, but just the commentators can, you know, certainly we have, there's a power that goes with that live microphone that I think we have to acknowledge. And so, you know, when you widen that media influence to, you know, the input of print journalists, mainly now read online rather than in the newspaper where you get your hands dirty. But, you know, people like Martin Samuel and Henry Winter and stuff do have an impact. They have huge followings on social media and so on. So they are spokespeople for the game. And then you widen it still to social media, and you know, look at the impact that Marcus Rashford's having at the moment through doing something which is non-football related, but using his football fame to promote something that he believes passionately in, and engaging on Twitter. You know, he's out there today challenging a view that he had a conversation with Boris Johnson. You know, he's actually challenging the health secretary about the truth of something at the moment on Twitter. So yeah, I mean, that, you know, from the simple start of answering this question about the impact that the media can have on the way that football is consumed and watched and discussed, it broadens out to this sort of extraordinary labyrinth, this almost this kind of monster that we've created of discussion around the game. Quite a lot of it unedited, quite a lot of it ungovernable, and as communicators, we've got to try to pick through the minefield, pick out the parts that we feel are important and relevant to understanding and analysing, and that will be your responsibility. You know, when you leave university and go out into the big wide world in which I work, to have that breadth of mind and consideration to editorialize, cut through all the rubbish and all the screaming and the shouting and the white noise, and find what's important about a match, a story, an issue, from both sides, and then relate it to people in a way that they can discuss it. I hear the word conversation used quite a lot at the moment. The conversation about everything from whether Jack Grealish should be in the England starting 11 to the bigger issues of discrimination against people of colour or people of gender within football. It's very, very important to me that we keep that conversation channel open. I do fear, and this is a responsibility that I'm going to charge you with as a future communicator. I do fear that sometimes the white noise is so loud around a particular issue that it closes down the conversation, that people who have questions, people who have doubts, people who haven't quite made their mind up, people who want more information, more enlightenment, more to hear about more experiences so that they can arrive at a view on something important. And it's important to Jack Grealish, whether he's in the England team or not, but obviously bigger issues too, that it is closed, that process is shut down by judgmental people who shout so loudly and are so certain of their position at a time of huge uncertainty for us all, that they actually close down the conversation, that nobody dare ask, do you think he runs back as much as Sterling or Rashford? I mean, if you want Grealish in the team, where you're going to play him, that you can still play Kane and Sterling and Rashford and Sancho and Mount and anybody. It's almost like nobody dare ask the questions because Jack is the moment, and anything that's pro Jack is out there, and you've got to get behind it. And if you take that analogy and apply it to the really important issues out there, both in football and in the wider world, are we having those open conversations that people talk about in a way that that we can raise our doubts, ask our questions, speak what's in our mind, use the language that comes to mind without fear of being knocked down for an inappropriate use of just a sound that comes out of our mouth. You as the future communicators have got to try to provide a stage where people can feel confident to have those conversations, so that we can get closer to the center of these issues and hopefully find resolutions that we can all agree on, rather than having edicts imposed upon us by the loudest voices. And that's you're going to need a little bit of courage in order to do that. But I think it's a very, very important part of future communication. Now that we've created this massive labyrinth of conflicting voices and sounds coming from all areas, some of them without any real authority or without any credential, but a tweet from somebody who would absolutely know, it might be a bot, gets reported on radio. A view of Jack Grealish gets reported on radio without any substantiation at all, and it carries this. It gets the same amount of airtime and pretty much the same weight as the view of I don't know, Dean Smith or Gareth Southgate. That's that's editorially nonsensical, and yet that's kind of where we are. Just let's get some views out there. Let's hear what you've got to say. And yeah, who are you? Have you actually considered this before you give your view? It's very important, I think, in journalism and communication to actually challenge people, challenge opinion formers and makers as to where that opinion comes from, and how much weight that it truly carries. And that's a job that you'll find more and more difficult, I think, with the passing of time.
You spoke a lot about the conversations. Do you feel that for a while there's not been these conversations on stigmas within football, like mental health or racism, discrimination. Do you think that due to the lack of conversations now, we're sort of looking for one divine answer, one way to solve it, when actually things like mental health issues and racism, discrimination, sexism, homophobia is such a complex matter that maybe conversations aren't enough?
Well, conversations are not in themselves enough. If something is wrong, it needs fixing, and if there is injustice in any area of life, then it needs action to try to put it right. And there are certain injustices and unfairnesses within football that are actually, a lot of them, reflections of society, but they are football's responsibility, and football needs to tackle them, and we need to do it, but we need to do it with the unity. There is a wonderful communion about football, I alluded to earlier, and we need to use that communion to work together in order to try to find solutions. But I do think that knowledge and education are the key to all of these things. And as I've covered a little bit of this in my previous answer. It's not about who shouts the loudest. It's about who talks with the most authority and experience. And we have to listen to people's experience. I think mental health is a fascinating area. We talk about it as if it's, or we sometimes talk about it. You've got to pick your words very carefully in order to represent your thoughts accurately. And we sometimes talk about it as if it's measles, as if it's just an identifiable condition. We know what the symptoms are. We know how it evidences itself. We know what the dangers are, and we know how to treat it. I mean, mental health is, I wouldn't even start to try to list the number of different conditions which are covered on this umbrella of mental health. I would probably tell you that I have never had mental health issues in my life, but an expert would probably be able to sit down with me and within 15 minutes find experiences in my life, moments in my life that I've had difficulty with and have evidenced themselves in some kind of mental health issue. And until you can have that kind of open conversation with somebody who has more experience and more knowledge in the area, in the field than you have, it may take a while even to shake an admission out of somebody that they've struggled with something, and we'd see the benefits sometimes of somebody with some kind of public status or familiarity coming out and discussing a difficulty that they've had in their life, which other people can then identify with, and you get a certain comfort from having a shared experience, particularly with somebody that you look up to or somebody that you admire for what they've done in football or something. And but again, all of this is opening up the conversation rather than if the danger, I always think, is dismissing a contrary view to your own as ignorance, and it is that judgmental certainty that so many people seem to have about different things now, which is shutting down the conversation. So that if I am uncertain that about something which has happened to me and has upset me, and identifying it as a mental health issue that I can then explore with other people and share my experience. If I just feel within my mind, better if I keep quiet, I'm okay, it happened a long time ago. I don't want to put myself out there and open myself up. I might be made to look foolish, or I might be made to look like an ignorant bigot of some kind. Then so you shut up, rather than actually ask a question and and offer your own experience to the debate, to the conversation. You pass by it, to use the old biblical analogy, you pass by on the other side of the road. And again, as communicators, somehow we've got to encourage all views, and we can't just dismiss somebody who says something that we disagree with as ignorance. We've got to listen to their questions, because they might make us think about their point of view and change our own point of view, or secondly, we might better help them. You know, we might be able to persuade them to our point of view. But you can't enforce that an opinion on somebody. You've got to take people with you, so that if you've got a crusade, whatever it may be, you've got to take people with you. You can't leave people behind just muttering under their breath or behind their hands about where you're going. I've written a book this year, which is coming out next year, and I talk a little bit about, you know, this issue. And I've come up with my own phrase that I think you create creed envy. And if something is really important to somebody in their life, and they want to talk about it and campaign and, you know, make an impact in that area, there is just a danger that other people watching on think, yeah, well, I've got this that I'm concerned about, but I don't shout out about it all the time. You know, that may be the most important thing to you in your life, but actually, you know, I've got a father with dementia, or I've got I'm aware of some neighbors down the road who've got a problem with, you know, something that you can't impose your perspective of life on me, because I understand why you're upset about that, whatever it is, but I've got stuff that I'm upset about too. And so rather than engaging with them and their issue, and maybe even trying to get them to see your issue, so that the two things can move forward, you kind of shut up and start to mutter about them behind the back, and you lose interest in their issue. And that's, you know, that again comes back to the kind of media that is dictating too much of the agenda, I think, at the moment. I mean, there is a real danger of raising your head above the parapet, because you know, if you've got an opinion on something, if you don't carry all with you, it can land, you know, it can land you in serious difficulties. I mean, I'm not quite. I've had some communication with Guy Mowbray in the last 24 hours. I'm not quite sure what he's being accused of, but he's out there, and I know it's affecting him. I know he's upset by it and worried by it, and the publicity that he's not sought but is getting. I actually think that most people will take a step back from this, look at the story that's out there, and think, what's that about? Don't understand that. But instead of crusading and campaigning for people to lay off him, they just stay silent, and so he's left to deal with it himself. And you know, it's happened to me a couple of times. It's happened to me in the last couple of months over something in a broadcast. So as I say, I think we have to be wary of this. When we express our views on something and start to nail our flag to a particular crusade, that we don't leave others behind and create this, what I call creed envy.
As someone who has had the privilege of being able to attend live sporting events during lockdown, how would you say football is different, aside from the obvious crowd? How big an impact do you feel that the crowd does play at football, and what do you make of fans not being allowed in to stadiums?
Well, I hear the arguments from a number of my colleagues that if people can gather in cinemas and theatres, why can't they gather in an open-air football stadium? If people can gather in certain open-air football stadium, why can't they gather in others? And commentators tend to have a fairly logical mind, and I can see the logic in that argument. I'm sure it's quite a strong argument, because I can't envisage why anybody in government or any kind of authority would want to push back against encouraging people to go to enjoy mass events at a time of all kinds of challenges for everybody. But there must be reasons, and I guess there must be scientific dangers of large gatherings of people at sporting occasions. And we continually hear the phrase, we should follow the science, but when the science is conflicting, then which part of the science do we follow? I'm not in a position to offer an informed opinion as to whether this is the right time to admit fans back into Premier League grounds and to Wembley for England internationals. So I don't offer an opinion. Others in my business do, and I guess if you get asked for an opinion, it's difficult not. If you're Ian Wright saying in a football television football studio, and Mark Pugac asked you, do you think the fans should be allowed back into Wembley? You're kind of not paid to say, I'm sorry, I don't know, Mark. What's the next question? You're kind of expected to have some opinion and view. But I do think that at the moment, I don't know is probably the best answer to an awful lot of questions out there. Football without its public is nothing like the same. It's not just that, people kind of refer to the crazy results and stuff, but it's more than that. It is the severing of a relationship, the most important relationship in professional football, because even though it is big business and hard business, it is still an entertainment business, and there is no point in providing entertainment unless there is a public to enjoy it. And even though that public are enjoying it to a degree through television broadcast, it isn't the sense of theatre that you have at a major sporting occasion is sadly lacking, and so therefore the spectacle is not the same. Whether there will be a knock-on effect to that relationship between football and its public remains to be seen. I think that football at Premier League level in a country like England has taken its public for granted for a long time. I think in terms, I hate people talking about brands and stuff, but in commercial terms, the brand loyalty to your football club is far stronger and deeper than it is to your favorite breakfast cereal or chocolate bar. And so football has a kind of an emotional hold over the supporters of the particular club, and it does tend to use that hold for commercial ends, and maybe that the strength of that relationship is being slowly diluted by the distance that football fans feel from their team at the moment. It's evidenced itself in the outrage over the pay-per-view games, over the Project Big Picture. It just seems as if one or two ideas are tapping into an undercurrent of dissatisfaction with the way the game is among core supporters, and I think it's quite healthy that voice is being raised and heard. Hopefully it will make football think twice before it makes significant changes to the kind of landscape and structure of the game. But it's it's an argument I can see from both sides. I mean, the pay-per-view argument, it wouldn't be a smart thing for me to make the following statement on Twitter, because there is so much kind of bubbling anger at being asked to pay $14.95 to watch your team play when you cannot go to see them in the flesh. But that match would not be televised, but for pay-per-view. You wouldn't have an option to see that game on television, but for this proposal that's being put forward. It is not what we had a month ago, when all games were being provided under the same terms of your subscription agreement with Sky or BT Sport, but they are commercial organisations who, rather as with a furlough scheme or some emergency measure that was brought in as a result of the lockdown and then the restart, it was never going to be forever. It was never going to be a permanent arrangement. So the argument is actually only about the timing of when the original model was was resumed. The original model is now has now resumed, but with an option to buy the games that you wouldn't normally have seen. Now, Sky and BT can't make a big fuss about it, because they're the villains in this particular drama. But anybody with any understanding of how the football business works can see it from the point of view of the clubs and the broadcast providers. That's what they are. They're commercial organizations, and part of the way that they make the money is by charging you to watch the football you want to watch. Well, if you want to watch this game, you're going to have to pay for it. And that, that's the simple way of it. Now, you could say it's the thin end of the wedge, and this is the way that they want football to be sold in future years. Fine, okay, I understand that argument too, and but that is a slightly different debate to the fact that this emergency arrangement that was brought in had to come to an end at some time, and the broadcasters and the football clubs decided that time is now. That's business. If you don't want to pay $14.95 or cannot afford to pay $14.95, don't do it. Watch the highlights on Match of the Day. That's free in a couple of hours' time. Now, again, going back to what we said 10 minutes ago, if I tweeted all that, I would get absolute abuse. I would probably get campaigns for me to step down and never commentate on football again. But it's easy to get righteous about something when you're not the commercial organization that's trying to make a living and pay wages out of selling football to people, either as a Premier League club or as a television company. Those kind of conversations can't really be had. I'm not saying that the big picture project is something that I wholeheartedly agreed with, but the clubs in the EFL, there are a lot of clubs in the EFL who wanted that to go through because they wanted the money now. They needed the money now. They didn't really care about the bigger picture and the future and the voting rights in the Premier League. They wanted the Premier League to donate some money to them in the emergency crisis that they are facing at the moment. And again, it's easy to sit at a laptop with 1,000 words to write for the Guardian and decry these billionaire owners who want everything for themselves. But in any business transaction, if you're going to give somebody some money, you're going to ask for something back. And you could say that Liverpool and Manchester United and their cohorts saw it as an opportunity to seize more power for themselves. But opportunism is part of business. It's what happens. I mean, amid all of the issues and problems that the pandemic has brought, economic problems as well as the health and mental health problems it's brought, amidst all of the economic problems that this pandemic has brought, it's created massive business opportunities for certain people. You know, if you're in the business of creating protective masks, I'm sorry, you want it to go on for a little while longer, please. You know, so there are people. Capitalism's still alive and well. There are people still making money. We've just actually we've got a leaky conservatory, which becomes apparent when the rain starts to come down, and we've just thought, well, we'll have a new conservatory because we're not going on holidays and things at the moment. We've got a little bit of spare cash. I mean, the conservatory companies, yeah, well, we can maybe do it in about 3 years' time because it's happening, you know. But there are people, there is a new economy, and people are adapting to it, and you know, football and everything else has got to adapt to the new set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. And again, we've got to take our blinkers off, stop climbing onto high horses, stop scaling soapboxes, shouting loudly at anybody who's trying to come up with an idea to deal with this issue, because it might just be a good idea, or some of it may be quite a good idea. And we need to, I mean, if anything comes out of this conversation, it is the absolute need to staunchly defend the right of people to have a conversation without being decried. We've read a story this morning, and it's a good reference point. I haven't sort of seen the whole detail of it, about a head teacher who gave an address to an assembly about Black History Month and used the word Negro, which was in common usage until quite recently. And you know, there are calls, I don't know how many, and because the story doesn't say how many, for her to step down because she said this word publicly, even though she said it in the context of it used to be called, you know, Negro history. And as a communicator, again, I want to defend that person's just their right to freely discuss this and have this conversation. But you won't find me tweeting anything about that at the moment, because I daren't. I don't know enough about it to begin with. I'd have to find out more about it before and form my own opinion. But I probably would share that opinion just with people close to me rather than publicly, because it's scary out there at the moment. And as I say, as future communicators, you've got to make it a little less scary.
On the topic of adaptability, Amazon Prime's new coverage of Premier League football has an option of coverage without commentary. Is this something that worries you? And do you think it taps into a wider society of people being able to access what they want when they want at the simple click of a button?
I've got 3 sons in mid to late 20s, and they're not around very much at the moment, partly because of the circumstances. They all live in London. But when they're here and there's a Premier League game on live, they don't sit down in the lounge, thankfully, with the old man and watch it. They go to the pub, and they don't come back and talk about the commentary because they haven't heard a word of it. You know, they've added their own commentary to the experience because they've watched it with mates, and they've had an ongoing conversation during the course of it. I think that's wonderful. I think that's how football should be watched. You know, I've already said that changing face of the consumption of media, and we, as commentators, broadcasters generally, we've got to adapt to that. I do think that the television football model in this country that has been in existence really since 1992, the subscription model, is under threat. I think the audience are becoming smarter and more selective, and would rather buy individual experiences, matches, UFC bouts, you know, whatever, WWE, whatever it is, you know, that they choose, rather than subscribe for a month or a year to a particular provider. I think I think Now TV are quite successful at the moment. You can buy a Sky Sports Day Pass for a tenner to watch a couple of games if you happen to be in that Sunday. You happen to have a few, back in the good old days when you had a few mates around and a few pizzas and stuff. Make a day of it, and then another Sunday you might be doing something else. You might be playing football, so you don't buy it that Sunday. You don't see the games. You catch up with it on Match of the Day, which still holds quite a healthy audience. Still sort of touching 2.5-3 million people regularly on a Saturday and Sunday night. So there's a catch up. I can go onto a search engine and watch a 3.5 minute edit of any football match, really, played just about anywhere in the world. I've just watched, I'm doing Barcelona on Wednesday, so I've just watched the 5.5 minute edit of the Classico, and it's told me all I need to know, really. So yeah, different consumption, more selective consumption, and part of that selection will be, what audio track you want. People, I much prefer restart football without fake crowd effects. If I make my choice when I'm watching, I just have the natural stadium sound. But then maybe because I've experienced that at first hand on several occasions now, and I just prefer that. I think the fake crowd effects are quite funny, actually, because they tend to be out of sync with what we're watching. So I'm not quite sure why you need that, but the majority of people, given that option, opt for the crowd effects. It's a matter of taste, and this won't be the first time that we had Fan Zone on Sky a few years ago as an alternative to the main commentary. I've seen BBC offering the radio commentary on a red button on live games that they've done. It's just part of the technology enables media providers to offer more different experiences without too much difficulty. So why wouldn't they do that? But I hope that the mainstream consumption of live football will always be with recognised commentators, be it 1, 2, 3, or it seems like 32 at times.
And finally, if you could revisit the Clive Tyldesley that's about to embark on the first day of his new career as a commentator, what is one piece of professional advice that you'd give and one piece of life advice that you'd give to yourself?
I've recorded some already.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah, so don't worry.
Sorry, I'm just doing some social media for him. You go ahead. That's fine.
That's good. I've been so lucky to do the job that I always wanted to do at the level that I've managed to reach, that I could only ever change detail if I could do it all over again. So I think I would humbly sort of step back from trying to rewrite any of it. Most of the best advice that I think that I've received on broadcasting, and the clue is in the word. I think I probably said this when I was down at the university. It is broad. It's not narrow casting. It is, you're commentating to a broad audience, and you should be inclusive and invite all of that audience in, particularly when you're fortunate enough to be communicating to 20 odd million people, which you can be at a World Cup. And most of that advice came from this guy, Reg Guttridge, who you won't find a great deal. You won't find any instruction from him on the search engines on YouTube or anything. You'll hear his commentary and the lovely common touch that he had in his commentary. It was very digestible. It was just like listening to a friend, really, an informed friend talking about the bout that you were watching, the championship contest that you were watching, and that was very much his message to broadcast, to I had to be careful when I was writing this in the book, because he used to tell me to broadcast of White Van Man, and it kind of sort of sounds a little bit condescending and dismissive in a way, but it's not. It's anything but that, because that's exactly what Reg was not. Because in a way, he was White Van Man. You know, he was from a pretty well, ordinary is not the right word, but economically quite a humble background, and so he, you know, his friends were manual workers and outer workers, and you know, they were the people that he conversed with in his life, in his social life. So they were the people that he tried to converse with when somebody put a microphone in his hand, and that is, I think, a wonderful lesson not to broadcast to. He used to chastise me for commentating to the England manager. He says, he's not listening, he's not watching. You know, don't try and impress anybody with your knowledge. Don't try to commentate to the, you know, pithy Guardian columnist who's about to pen 650 poisoned words about you. You know, don't try and impress him or her, but just commentate to the other one. He used to say, is your grandma watching? Right, well, commentate to her. And by commentating to that person, you then embrace so many millions more around that person who are watching with the same level of interest. You're not trying to commentate to football aficionados. That's not what it's about. It is broadcasting. So get to identify your audience and broadcast to them, serve them. My work for Rangers Television is different from my work for CBS. You know, they're the two broadcasters that I've worked for in the last few days. TalkSport before that. TalkSport is a national British audience, tend to be football fans, because they're taking the bother to listen to a particular match. It's not like you're just playing music or anything. It's fairly intense radio listening. So I think you can assume that there's a level of football interest there, and therefore a level of football knowledge. Move on to the Wednesday, CBS Sports, a US audience. So less involvement, less knowledge. I mean, you could argue both ways. You could argue that it's quite a niche thing. It's still in the States watching Champions League football, so maybe they have got an investment in the game, but you've got to try to assume there's probably a wider sports audience with a kind of curiosity about what this is. So explaining the Champions League and its level. I did Bayern Munich on Wednesday, and I did a little intro where I related how difficult it is to defend this competition by relating to how rarely the Stanley Cup or the Super Bowl or the Baseball World Series has been successfully defended. It's one thing to win it, but to win it again is more difficult. So again, commentating to that audience. And then on Sunday, I commentated essentially to an audience of Rangers fans. So even though I'm not a cheerleader for Rangers during the game, even though it's still editorially objective and I'll call a bad pass, all of that audience want Rangers to win. So I even though I've done a lot of background information on Livingston, I'm not really commentating from a neutral's point of view. I'm objective, but I'm not neutral. I mean, when Rangers score, it's a happy event because that's your audience. So you communicate to that audience. So that would be my kind of professional advice. My life advice would probably now be relate to what we've already talked about, to listen to other people, listen to other people's opinions and views. You know, when you've been on the planet for as long as I have, you probably feel there's a danger that you feel like you've seen it all. I mean, you'll know stubborn old people, parents, uncles, aunties, who, you know, you may even know somebody who's old enough to have lived through the war, and you know, if you come out of a world war, you're entitled to look down on little Luke and feel as if he's got no idea what the world's really about. And you know, experience is, I think, really, really important, but it actually can condition us a little bit. So you, in order to use your experience and continue to add to your experience, even when you get into your 60s like me, you've got to keep your ears and eyes open. And and if you hear views that are contrary to your own, you've got to give them some consideration, in order to keep your mind open to having your views amended or even wholly changed. And so as in life, and it is reflected in the work that we do, it's very important to keep listening, keep trying to understand, keep asking questions, keep being brave enough when you can, without stepping into the middle of a Twitter storm, asking questions, challenging, and keeping your mind open. That really is the most important thing. I don't know whether I lost the England job with ITV because I'm in my 60s. What I do know is that our 4 children, who are 25 to 29, 25 to 30 now, are amongst my 4 best friends in the world, and I can certainly have to relate to them. That's part of my job as a parent. And I would take a major offense at any suggestion that because I'm 66 years of age, I cannot understand somebody in their 20s, or what they're thinking, or what they believe, what's important to them, because I'm sorry, I'll make it my business to do exactly that. And both in life and in communication, it's very important not to leave anybody behind, because, you know, to go back to Reg, my grandma, when she was watching the match, counted 1 viewer, just like the England manager, if he happened to be watching that match. They were equally important in that audience. My grandma probably needed a little bit more of my research and ability as a communicator to help her enjoy the game. And so in that sense, she was probably more important than the England manager. And that's what communication is all about reaching people and trying to enlighten them. And in order to do that, you've got to keep enlightening yourself.
Remember the name, Clive Tyldesley.
Okay, matey.
Thank you very much for joining me today. I know you've got a very busy schedule, so I very much appreciate it.
All righty. It's a pleasure. Thanks. Cheers.